So to start with, when you look at the most recent MLA survey that just came out, it covers 2009 to 2013. And they do include the LCTLs, so that's commonly taught languages. And they define them kind of differently from, I think everyone defines them in a different way, depending on where you are or where you're coming from. But the MLA defines them as other than the top 15 languages. And again, that requires a little bit of context. Depending on the kind of institution where you are, the top 15 varies a little bit. So at some community colleges, some languages like Vietnamese, for example, are in the top 15, whereas they're usually not at the four-year institutions. But anyway, they're the larger languages, Spanish, French, but also Korean is included. So there are quite a few of the major languages included there. Other than that, there are almost 250 smaller languages taught. But what's interesting about that, when you look at the data a little bit more closely, is that there is a lot of volatility in how these languages are taught and when they're taught. So 63 are on the list now that were not on the previous two lists, but 56 have now disappeared. So I think that speaks to the very delicate balance of having LCTLs in the curriculum. They come and go. There's quite a bit of variability there. The other thing that speaks, I think, to the fragility of these languages is that 104 of these languages are taught at one institution only. And so what that happens then, if those enrollments go down or that institution decides to cut a program, that language is gone. So I think that's something that kind of speaks to what I want to talk about today. And then another issue is that if you look at the enrollments, only 4 of these languages have more than 1,000 students enrolled, and only 4 more have more than 100. So the majority of them, almost all of them, have fewer than 100 enrollments. So these are truly less commonly taught languages. These are some tables from the report, just by region. What's interesting is that not much has changed in terms of the distribution. Sort of the largest region is Asia and Pacific region, but it's somewhat evenly distributed over the various continents. Budget cuts have been something that we've all talked about quite a bit, and I want to look at it from 3 different levels. The first one, of course, probably most of you are familiar with as well, is the federal budget cuts. Title VI was cut back significantly, almost 50%. It's bounced back a tiny little bit, but I think most of us are affected with respect to the area studies centers that we have. At Yale, we essentially lost a number of our centers and are down now, and that's where most of our less commonly taught languages were taught. At the state level, it's a different picture in a way. There have been huge budget cuts in higher education. But what happens, I think, then, is that when state institutions need to make decisions about which programs to maintain, they're going to look at vulnerability of programs. So if a program is a language program with 6 students in it, that's an easy target for cuts. And I think that's where languages have been cut in general. Even the more robust languages like French and German have been cut. But I think the LCTLs are among the most vulnerable in that sense. And I have a figure here of this is state funding, and I just cut it off, but it's basically all the states. The reductions are essentially permanent. And if you look down, Arizona is almost a 50% cut in state spending per student and going down. So that's a significant effect, and that's staying with us. That has not bounced back. That has kind of stayed down from the pre-recession phase. So the institutional challenges there, we have all the post-recession budget cuts, and it's not just a state institution. I'm at what people consider to be a very rich institution, and yet we are under enormous budget cuts. Our endowment has been down, and there's constant scrutiny of programs, and so we are essentially in the same boat that everyone else is in. And I think another issue that is affecting us in the languages is the so-called humanities crisis, with this strong push toward favoring the STEM field, the science, technology, engineering, and math fields. So many institutions are shifting. So with the remaining resources, if there's a shift in resources away from the humanities and language teaching toward the science teaching that is going to affect the breadth and the depth of the programs that one can support within the languages or across the languages. Just a few of the, I just did a Google search just to show you some of the things that have been happening. And it's all over the map. So there's Texas, cutting languages. In all fairness, I have to give you Yale. We just cut our Dutch program, which is definitely something that is near and dear to my heart. A year ago, Penn just closed its Africa Center. That was a Title VI issue, I believe. And it goes on with across institutions of all sizes, across all states, Lehigh's in Pennsylvania, Alabama. I just picked a few, but if you Google it, you can see it, it's everywhere. And so that's something that we need to be very concerned about and try to figure out what can we do about it, given that this is the state we're in. I don't think we can stick our heads in the sand anymore and think, oh, well, you know, we'll fight and we'll get it back. I don't believe that that's the case, and that's why I want to kind of argue for sustainable models so we can think about it differently and perhaps build strengths in different ways. A few little points of light, so to speak. This is also coming out of very recent articles. There's one, the first one is in California, where they're now requiring students, and they're largely bilingual students, they're Spanish, English bilingual students, and they're requiring them to study Chinese. So the goal there is to have these students be trilingual. There is a push for more dialects in Arabic. Certainly this is happening in Texas. Texas Austin has always been on the forefront of that. We're doing quite a bit with that. So multi-dialectal focus. And then I saw this about Indiana, so I thought I'd include it. Several states now have adopted a biliteracy goal, and so students that take foreign language courses and pass an exam have this seal of biliteracy, and so there are now 9 states that are doing that. So there are some positive trends. There are some in California, for example, some of the institutions have put some money back into language instruction, but by and large, I think we need to look at the fact that we're down. Another issue that I think has an effect on all of this is the federal policy. So it's not only the money that's being cut, but it's also the emphasis that has changed. And with Title VI, there used to be a huge amount of support specifically for teaching less commonly taught languages. That objective is now changed, and if you read the recent education, the international strategy of the U.S. Department of Education, it's now about global competencies, and I find it a very nebulous concept. You can do a lot with global competency that is not necessarily teaching languages. So I think it diffuses the emphasis, and it creates opportunities to do a lot of other things, some of which may be very valuable, but I think we have to be very careful if we take resources into one direction, then we take them away from where we used to put them. So within the context of globalization, we also need to look at study abroad. I think particularly when we talk about languages and less commonly taught languages, if students have an opportunity to go abroad, that adds to their ability to become fluent, to be engaged in the kind of work that they might be doing, academic or research. So if you look at the most recent report from IIE, and they call it their Open Door report, it comes out once a year. It's really interesting. So everyone is going, yay, a tripling of study abroad over the last 2 decades. So we're now at nearly 300,000 students. Every year we're seeing an increase. It's kind of modest, 2.1% past year. So it's all good. If you dig a little deeper though, then it's not quite as great. If you look at the total number of students going abroad, it's only 1.5% of students in the US that do go abroad. So it's a very tiny fraction of the total number of students in US post-secondary institutions. And then they're going shorter and shorter and shorter. Now most of them are going on short-term stays, which can be as short as 2 weeks. They don't even go for a semester anymore. the year-long experience, 3% out of the one, so that's also not. So in order to do language deeply and well, you need to really go for a longer period of time. I mean, as a non-native speaker of English, I can tell you this. I went to England for a long period of time. I came to the United States. Well, it was supposed to be a year, and I'm not going to tell you how many years it's been now, but it's been way longer than 1 year. And my English has improved over the years, so you do need to spend time, and that's disappearing. And then what do they study? Well, I can tell you, not languages anymore. That's going down and down and down. So it's going down every year. There's always a decline. And what are they studying? Well, they're studying social sciences, business. And what do they study it in? English. So languages are not the core focus of study abroad per se. A lot of them are going for other purposes. I like Celeste Kinginger's recent book on study abroad, and one of her assertions is essentially that the junior year abroad no longer exists. Many of us of a certain generation, I'm certainly part of, that was really the thing to do. You went for a full year abroad, and that's how you really learned your language. But the students don't have time for it anymore, and they'll just go on these quick stays. The other thing that she talks about, which I think is a really interesting comment that she makes, that there is what she calls an increasing commodification of the global experience. And essentially what students are doing, they're sort of checking off on their resume, yeah, I've been abroad, I've done that. It's really not so much about cultural engagement or language learning. It's about having done something and being able to demonstrate that to your employer. And so it shifts the emphasis, and I think that there's a danger, again, for language teaching. To get back a little bit to institutional globalization, so another issue there is that many of our institutions, I'm sure Indiana the same way, we're big on it, we're all claiming that we're global institutions. The problem there is that it's not really clear what the role of foreign language departments is in that globalization. The decisions are being made at a high administrative level. They're usually made about all kinds of issues that really don't consider languages as being central to this globalization. And so Heidi Burns talked about that. That's the foreign language departments really play a very marginal role, and that mostly in globalization, English is the language. And I put the infamous, and you've probably seen the quote from Larry Summers, who used to be the president of Harvard, who essentially says that, you don't really need to learn foreign languages. If you know English as a global language, you can get by with everything. And that seems to be sort of the discourse of globalization. Well, you globalize, but then you speak English everywhere. So again, I think that's a problem. Chantal Warner also did a very interesting article about this in the L2 journal. And then finally, and I think that this is something that Rick will talk about in much more detail, a thing that we really need to think about in the context of language teaching in general, but something that also should be considered very, very carefully within LCTL teaching, is that we're entering a different era of teaching. We are beyond the traditional communicative methods that were very transactional, where every textbook was sort of similar. Chapter 1 was introductions, and then you went into shopping, and then you went into restaurants. Claire Koch did an interesting article in a modern language journal issue devoted to globalization, and really talks about how we now look at foreign language teaching. And she says it has destabilized the codes, norms, and conventions that foreign language educators relied upon to help learners be successful users of the language once they had left their classrooms. These changes call for a more reflective, interpretive, historically grounded, and politically engaged pedagogy that was called for by the communicative language teaching of the 80s. And I think this is a really important point that we need to think about and find a way to implement in our classrooms. So, sustainable approaches, I think for LCTLs, what do we do about this and how do we do this? And what I'm going to try to talk a little bit about next is how can we adopt more collaborative and more creative approaches so that we can strengthen language instruction. And I think we need to think about doing this across institutional boundaries. And we also need to begin doing this across disciplinary boundaries. We can no longer remain isolated in our small domains. We also need to become more flexible to the needs of our students, whatever level those students are, whether they're undergrads, grads, or professional school students. And we cannot just stick to the basic level of instruction. We have to think about, in order for languages to truly be embedded in the curriculum, we need to go beyond these instrumentalist goals. In other words, we need to adopt a different pedagogy, and we need to make sure that we have opportunities for students to move to professional level language skills, which means we have to have languages through the advanced levels. I'm going to try to give you a couple of examples of things that we do, not because I think that we're doing things that are any better than anywhere else, but I want to try to make a couple of points about this. I was in Copenhagen in September, and we had a discussion there also about, in the European context, how can we make more languages more meaningful for students studying all kinds of disciplines, not just language majors, but students that are studying whatever they want to study. How can language be connected to that? And so there's a couple of things I wanted to show you a little bit about. So the first one is a program that we have. It's called DILS, Directed Independent Language Study. And it's kind of a unique program. It allows students at Yale to request any language that we don't already teach. We normally on a regular basis teach about 40 to 50 languages. So they can ask for a language that we don't teach, and they can request for up to 4 semesters of support for this. We pay for it, essentially, and we match them up with a language partner. They meet twice a week. It's very self-directed. So they don't go by regular materials usually. What they do is they decide what their goals are and then adapt the learning to those specific goals. Most of the students, and I'll give you some examples, have very specific reasons. It may be research abroad, field work. And so they need to do not just sort of generic language, but they need to be prepared to do interviews or to do research. We do test them. We want to make sure that they are that they make progress. So before we allow them to get refunded, we make sure that their progress is on target. And the reason why I'm including it today is that we have, over the past 3 years, included distance partnerships, and I'll talk about that in a second. So far, we've had it's been around for about 15 years now, and they have to do this in addition to their language requirement. We have a language requirement at Yale, so they can. This is not a for-credit kind of program. They have to fulfill the language requirement with one of the languages at Yale. And after they do that, then they can study additional languages. We've had more than 80, I think we're close to 90 now. And the students come from all kinds of majors. And this is particularly what is important about it, is that it fits usually in with what they're studying, what they're researching. These are some of the languages we've done. I thought that math is usually more good. So pretty much covered all the continents. And some of the really least commonly taught languages, some of the ones when they request it, we say, what? Where's that spoken? You know, we have to sometimes look them up. I go to the ethnologue and we'll say, oh yeah, that's where that's spoken. So it's an interesting process of finding the appropriate language partners, which is one of the reasons that we went with the distance model. So here's some pictures of what we're doing. So what we called our AVD program was a grant from the Arthur Vining Davis Foundation. They had heard about our DILS program, and they were asking us, well, what about online teaching? What about, is there a way that you can do something with this program that involves a distance connection? And we had piloted a couple of languages. We had done some Apundukung, and we had done Nawa as a distance. And so we used that as a pilot to show, yes, you know, we can connect. We have connected students to Mexico to study Nahuatl. And so they gave us funding to provide these programs to our students. Now, there's some advantages to having the distance collaborations. One is we can find qualified teachers. We've actually found several of them here in Indiana, I should say. Thank you for that, because you've been able to provide some of our students with wonderful language partners in a number of languages. So it's usually finding languages that we don't have. We have an incredible international community at Yale of scholars and postdocs and visiting faculty. But even despite that, we can't cover it all. So it gives us access to languages across the country. Usually the partners are in the United States, and part of it is just logistical reasons. We have to hire people, and hiring people abroad is really problematic. So we try to stick to finding people somewhere in the US. And so this is a list of languages where we've done that, and what we're particularly excited about is that we've been able to do a lot of Native American languages this way. A lot of the Native American communities have now started language programs, and we can now connect our students to these programs. I'm going to show you a little clip of one of our students who was of Choctaw heritage, and she wanted to learn the language, and we were able to link her to Oklahoma, where the teacher was. And she studied for 2 years. Her brother was at Dartmouth, and he really wanted to join the program. We couldn't fund it because it has to be a Yale student, but he was really kind of mad that his sister was studying in Choctaw and he couldn't. This is just the languages. So this is not where the partners are located. This is where the languages were located. And we're in this specific. This is a sub-program of this other program, and we've been able to cover quite a few languages across the globe. The reason is that we have a very active study abroad program. All of our students are entitled to international summer opportunities. So about 85 to 90% of Yale students in their 4 years will go abroad at least once, but many can go more than once. We have tons and tons of opportunities, and there are internships, research opportunities. And so in that connection, they often want to study a language so that when they go abroad, they actually do have some of the language and cultural skills that are necessary to go. This is a kind of a bad chart. I don't like it, but basically what we're doing with our testing is we're making sure that that their outcomes are appropriate, that they are on target. Now, the problem with this chart is that it doesn't show you the length. So this can be anywhere from 1 semester to 4 semesters. But what we're trying to look at is, where do students come out with DILS as opposed to where they come out in regular departmental languages? And what we're seeing is that it's as good, and sometimes it's even, we have a few that are coming out superior after 3 or 4 semesters. And the question is why? Well, they're highly motivated to do this. It fits, they have to do an application. We're selected. We select about half of the ones that apply. They have very specific goals. The sessions are dedicated specifically to their needs. It's usually one-on-one. It can be in groups of up to 3, but very many of these languages, there's just one student with one language partner. They have 2 hours a week of intensive one-on-one conversation. And when you look at how many minutes a semester students have in a regular language class, I think it comes out to actual speaking time for students, something around 20 minutes per semester. So here they get 2 full hours a week. So it just, even though these are not necessarily teachers, they're trained language partners. So it's very self-directed. The students have to bring their ideas. They have to do a lot of work to do it. But it does usually turn out quite well. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of one student who's doing a PhD on the bioarchaeology of sacrifice and warfare, and needed to know how to decipher oracle bone inscriptions. Now, this is, of course, not a spoken language, but it is a language that she needed to learn. She's been studying for, I think, 4 semesters now, and has benefited greatly from that. So this is one of the probably least commonly taught. I don't even know if this is on the MLA list, probably not. Another one is a PhD student who is doing rhythm and Bulgarian folk music, and is going to be he wants to be a music theory professor and needed to learn Bulgarian to do his research in Bulgaria. So these are all very serious. This is not just kind of like, well, it sounds like fun. These people have very serious commitments to studying languages in the context of their disciplines. Another one, this is a professional school student from Yale Law School who is interested in legal issues, and she studies informal courts in Egypt. So we do a lot of dialects, of Arabic dialects. We require that they have fulfilled, that they're in the 3rd year of MSA, and so then they can do, we've done many of the dialects, Egyptian, Moroccan, Iraqi, Levantine, you name it. So we do them all, and it's a way to kind of connect the students with access to the Arabic dialects. Here's another one, it's anthropology, someone doing ethnographic research in Sierra Leone, and needed to know Creole. Now they're not all PhD students, we have undergrads as well, but everyone that goes, I have an undergrad example, yeah, here. This is a really nice group. This is a group of, there are 2 students that are both heritage speakers of Sinhala, and they started with us in DILS, and they are, like many of our students, very activist, so they had these service groups that they were doing in the summer to go to Sri Lanka, to work with orphanages there, and they gathered together 13 other students who did not speak Sinhala, so they were the leaders of the group, to work in Sri Lanka with these orphanages, and they've been studying, they're continuing to study now in our other program that I'll talk about next. Very serious and committed to going back to basically their home communities and to work there on issues that are important there. I have a little, I can hopefully show a little clip. It should play. So this is a student I mentioned who studies Choctaw, and I thought it might be nice to hear her talk about her experience.
And I'm sure, I don't know if y'all heard of Choctaw, but it's a Native American language spoken within the 2.5 counties of Oklahoma in the southeast region. And there are about 200,000 Choctaws affiliated with the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, but currently about 10,000 speak the language. And the reason, I'd always wanted to learn the language, but I started at Yale taking Spanish because I thought that would be more practical, which it is. And I enjoyed that. I spent my freshman summer in Spain studying through a Yale program, and then this last summer I was in Argentina interning with a nonprofit organization while developing my Spanish skills. But this semester I decided I wanted to figure out some way to learn Choctaw, so I contacted Angela Gleason and applied through the DILS program to take it. And basically, I'm an American Studies major, so I've always wanted to be able to read Choctaw, maybe use it in a senior thesis, but also it's also a personal thing as well. My great-grandfather spoke Choctaw, and he was one of the original enrollees who the government moved in 1900. It was around 1900. They moved them in rail cars, so there was a group, the last group of Choctaws that moved from Mississippi to Oklahoma, and that group was probably, there was about a couple thousand, and a lot of that generation wouldn't teach the next generation because it was looked down upon to know Choctaw or keep those customs. So my grandmother and her siblings were sent to boarding schools where they weren't allowed to speak Choctaw, or they cut their hair, made them wear certain clothing, and they didn't get to see their family really. So it was that generation that the language almost died out, and here recently the tribe has started their own language department. So a lot of people who are my age are starting to learn the language again, and I think that's quite interesting and pretty exciting. So I felt that this was if Yale's going to offer this DILS program, I might as well take advantage of it. So they connected me with someone from home who's a native Choctaw speaker, and we meet twice a week, and it's been amazing so far. And it's also nice because it's neat to hear her stories, and things that happened in the past that aren't really written about. I don't really get to study certain things about like Southeast tribe cultures or specific narratives. They're really not spoken about much at the college, or at least not right now. It's still like a new field. So yeah, I don't know. It's pretty exciting.
So she has a very personal, there's a whole tragic history of her tribe. She also uses this for her senior thesis, so she has both. I always like her in there. She's now graduate. She went back over the summers and worked in Oklahoma after she started learning Choctaw. So I like her story. She's a wonderful, she's just graduated, but a wonderful student, an example. So I'm going to move along to my second example, which is the shared course initiative that was mentioned earlier this morning. And the shared course initiative is we have a grant from the Mellon Foundation, and we have a collaborative project between Columbia, Cornell, and Yale to share less commonly taught languages. So the way we do it, we looked at what we were teaching, and among the three of us, we were teaching over 100 languages, but we shared very few. So it kind of speaks to the MLA report, languages that are taught at only one institution. And we were all under pressure, budgetary pressure, and we decided it didn't really make sense for each of us to maintain independent programs with very small numbers of students that were increasingly under pressure. We have a full-time Zulu instructor, wonderful, but enrollments in Zulu are not exactly the same as they are in Spanish. And so the idea was to say, where are your strengths and where are your needs, and to share those across the three institutions. So we've been doing that, and I'll show you the language that we've been doing this with gradually. Every year we're adding more to it. So the model that we have for this is a video conferencing model, and it's not the old-fashioned video conferencing. It's a pretty extensively outfitted room with multiple screens, multiple cameras, high definition, ceiling-mounted microphones. It's classroom-to-classroom model, so it is kind of not quite what you're talking about today. We don't want to call it online because it really isn't online. It's live. The students meet 4 to 5 days a week in their classrooms. They're not sitting in their dorm rooms. They're supposed to come to class. So the teacher may be at Cornell, but the Yale student needs to come to our classroom and be there to be taught that language, like a regular classroom. It's very multimodal. They have interactive whiteboards, they have iPads, document cameras, all the bells and whistles, whatever the instructor decides to choose. We're also not imposing a specific pedagogy. We're working with instructors to provide them with a lot of tools, and then they choose whatever is most appropriate for what they're teaching. And these courses are credit-bearing, and they're during the academic year. This was a huge thing. Yale, as our peer institutions, was not ready to go to online or distance learning. We're just not there yet. We don't want to do that. We wanted to maintain the quality. We wanted to maintain the classroom experience for the students. So the model that we created enabled us to do just that, to make sure that the students have a regular classroom experience. So the objectives are, we obviously want to expand the enrollment. Some of these languages have very few students enrolled. We also, this way, we can add to the languages on our campus. So we lost, for example, our Tamil program, but we're now getting Tamil from Columbia. So we're able to increase the number of languages. There are also gaps in our curriculum. We have certain programs that need certain languages. That our religious studies program needed Classical Tibetan. And we now have a very robust Classical Tibetan program coming in from Columbia that our graduate students are taking and needing for their work. The other thing that we're trying to do is to create a community of practice. As you probably all well know, is teaching less commonly taught language is a lonely business. You're often, and I've done it, you're often the only person on your campus that is teaching a language. And you may be in a department that has a bigger language. Like I was Dutch in a German department, but being the only one, not so much connected to your departments. So the idea is that we connect people with similar challenges, similar needs pedagogically. So we do a lot of training. We bring people together. We just did training in New York early May. We also do training using our rooms. So we have a lot of workshops that we just do with our video conferencing rooms. And what we try to do is develop this community of practice among our instructors. These are a couple of pictures of what it looks like. Up there, it's Tamil, Romanian, Classical Tibetan. And these are you probably can't see it. I just wanted to show you a little bit of the growth of the program. We're now in, we had 2 phases of this grant. The first phase was 2 years. We're now in a second phase, which is a 3-year phase. And we're entering the 2nd year of this phase. But what I wanted to show you here is that we not only add languages, but what we also try to do is add levels. And the idea is that we start usually with the beginning level, not always, but most of the times. And then we try to add an intermediate level the 2nd year, and then ideally an advanced level. And one of the reasons that this now can happen is that if you have a critical mass of enrollments, you can actually teach an advanced course. If you don't have enough students, if you start with 5 students, and in the 2nd year you have 2 students left, and by the 3rd year you may not have enough students left to actually offer an advanced course. By combining enrollments among these institutions, we can now, Tamil is thriving at the moment and has gone through the advanced level. We're also teaching 3 levels of Zulu now, which before was never always certain. There are up to 3, it's not always 3 institutions. We can accommodate up to 3 institutions, but sometimes it's just 2 institutions, like Yoruba is shared with Columbia and Cornell. Yale has its own program. We have a fairly large program, so we're not participating in that. There's some rules to what we're doing. So we have a very high-level agreement. It's a legal agreement signed by our institutions that stipulates a number of things. So we don't exchange tuition, for example. We're 3 private institutions, similar. We also don't exchange credits. So what happens is we get the courses approved at each institution. When we decide to offer a course from another institution, so for example, if Yale is receiving Sinhala from Cornell, that course is already approved at Cornell. There's an instructor there. Then what we do is we work with the departments to provide a course proposal. We get the instructor approved. It goes through a whole committee, our normal committee procedure, of course, a study committee. It goes into our online system, and it gets listed as a Yale course with a small notation that is actually offered from another institution. And then we make sure that the students understand that when they go to the classroom, there is going to be a video camera and the instructor is going to be on the other end. We have some caps on the enrollment. The max of among 3 institutions is 12, which is usually not a problem for these languages, although we are reaching some caps in Hungarian and Tamil, which is a good problem to have, we think. And we also have to stipulate that students must be able to fulfill their language requirements. So when we start a language, we make sure we continue for up to 4 semesters, which would be the language requirement that needs to be met. We also have differences, and this is really where the logistical issues are the most problematic for this project. We have different language requirements. We have different weekly hour requirements. Yale requires that classes are taught 5 days a week, an hour a day. All language classes at the beginning and intermediate level have to be taught. So when we get a class coming from Cornell, if they teach 4 hours a week, they have to add an additional hour to meet our requirements. So we always teach to the maximum requirements. We only have a 3-semester language requirement. If our instructors are involved and Columbia is involved, we need to teach 4 semesters because Columbia requires 4 semesters. And then another really important rule is that the sending institution sets the times and the schedule. It sounds simple, but the problems are no one starts their semesters at the same time. No one ends their semesters at the same time. We have different breaks, our fall breaks, our spring breaks. What days we have off are different. Who does Thanksgiving and who does not Thanksgiving week-long breaks. Columbia does election day, you name it. There are differences in everything. So we have to have a rule about that. We require that the students understand that they may have to be in class longer than their regular semester. They may have to start a little bit early than their semester. They may be in session over a break. And we make it work for them, but those are the rules. They have to understand it's a privilege to get these languages, and we have to have some rules to regularize it, because otherwise it's really complicated. Even the hours per day are different. So everyone has a different starting and ending point throughout the day, which means that a class that is sent to us from Cornell may essentially take up 2 of our time slots during the week. So we have to have rooms that we can control so that we can make sure that those classes can be received. There are some challenges. We have very different institutional cultures, different rules and ways of dealing. So we have to make sure that the instructors are aware of that we work with them. So that's the important part of getting together for regular workshops. The scheduling already managed. One of the things that they think is a problem is, or at least at first when they begin teaching, is how do you manage the far end and the close end? They say they often pay a lot of attention to the far end and they forget that they have students right there in their classroom. So we do a lot of training on how do you balance these different rules. And then there is a lot of technology, but one of the things that is initially a little bit of a problem is there's sometimes too much technology. So you don't want to start it all at once. So we try to scaffold it gradually over the years. So right now, a lot of instructors are doing very interesting things with iPads. But for some, it took a little while. And one of the things we're doing, particularly, it works well with non-Western scripts using iPads, and it can be projected, and students can practice and work collaboratively on their language practice. For students, scheduling can be a problem because it may conflict with their regular schedules. They would like opportunities to meet their peers. It works really well with Columbia because we have a train on the East Coast, so they can be in Columbia an hour and a half. Cornell is a little harder. It's centrally isolated, as they call it. So trying to get all the way to Ithaca is sometimes difficult. We do require that instructors travel once a semester and teach the other way around, at least once a semester. So the instructors go to the other institution and just teach from there so their students understand what it's like to be on the receiving end. And then the instructors meet with their students. So that's important so that students have that contact, get to know the person. One of our grad students said, what is different about this is at first he felt the instructor was 2-dimensional rather than 3-dimensional. And so you really want to build in that 3rd dimension. It's a real live person that you have access to. But there are benefits too. There is a lot of professional development. And there's a lot of, there is really now, after a few years, what we're really seeing is this extended community of practice. We had a very large workshop with many instructors at Columbia this spring. And people know each other, they work together, they share ideas, whether it's about heritage teaching, whether it's about how do you teach script, how do you use this kind of technology. We also try to situate them within the larger academic context of the institution, so that this is not just a language that's there to serve as a service to the institution, but that there is a meaningful connection with the programs. So for example, the classical Tibetan instructor from Yale, from Columbia comes to Yale and gives lectures about his research at Yale in our South Asian departments. And so there are different ways that we can make sure that these connections are made. Cornell just had an African Languages Day where all the instructors that were teaching African languages went to Cornell and they had a whole day to talk about cultural issues with Africa. So for students, one of the benefits, and I'll show you a little video clip in a second, we have a lot of heritage learners. A lot of students take these languages for heritage reasons. And the student I'll show you talks very eloquently about the ability to, with these least commonly taught languages, to have a community. We are private institutions, so we don't have a local community. We don't draw upon a local heritage community in the way maybe a larger state institution might. UCLA might have heritage Russian, and they have a large local community. We don't have it. Our students come from all over, and so in order to build a heritage community, now they do this, but they do it across institutions. The other thing that our Zulu instructor talked about is that she has graduate students. She's quite well known. She works in South Africa a lot. She had a student from Michigan come into her advanced class because they knew her, they're doing research. And so they're coming together because of their interests. So we had one from Cornell, one from Michigan, and one from Yale, all working together with her. And what she liked about it was that they bring different experiences. So you can have real, meaningful, authentic interaction going on, because they're not all talking about the same thing. So I have a quick video. I'm almost wrapping up, but this is like a 1-minute video. And then
for days. Just the fact that I'm being taught in a language that is not only applicable or useful for me with a community in my school, but a community when I go back home in San Diego, to a community when I go home in Nigeria, and you know, always growing up being, I wouldn't say made fun of, but whenever I would go home to Nigeria, I had family always ask me, why don't they know how to speak, and you know, my little cousin's making fun of me and things like that. So I used to like nag on my parents, why don't I know my own native language? Why can't I understand you when my mother and father are speaking to each other at home? It was something that was always so frustrating. And just seeing that there was an opportunity for me to be instructed in my native language and use that going back home has been, I mean, it's something that has really pushed my Columbia experience as something that I really, really value. So, yeah.
Right.
So Oyeni is a student at Columbia learning Yoruba from an instructor at Cornell. We're doing a number of research projects. One of them is on heritage learning. We're doing a mixed methods approach, collecting data on the students, doing background surveys, interviews. We're doing class observations. We assess them all with oral proficiency interviews just to see how their language development is happening, self-assessments. And we're trying to do this over 3 years. So we're right now in the middle of it. There's some questions that we're asking of what is this experience, how for both students and instructors are the outcomes. Sybil are going to rush through this a little bit, but we're trying to ask a lot of questions, so it's not just about teaching the course. We really also want to see how this works and look at it as a research project. What are the benefits, what are the challenges? On the basis of preliminary data, that article that I have coming out in the MLJ talks a little bit about that. The students do pretty well so far. I can't really make any broad generalizations, but they seem to be right on target. Although a couple are doing really extremely well. We have several at the superior level. And so some of them are doing better than expected. And we're going to ask, why is that? I think I have some ideas about that. They're very motivated. These are not the kind of languages that you just do. I mean, they can fulfill the language requirement, but you know, you can do that with Spanish. So why take Classical Tibetan? There are very specific reasons why they're taking these languages. The classes are small, but very interactive, and it's very intensive. So they're getting a high quality experience in the classroom. The final thing I want to talk about, I'll just mention, not really dwell on, but another concern is materials for these languages. And I know you're developing lots of materials here. We are in conversation with Carl Blythe from Texas Austin, who is developing lots of materials for less commonly taught languages through the Center for Open Educational Resources and Language Learning. And the new project, his center has been renewed, and his new projects are particularly about that. So I thought it was an important thing to mention today, that there are new projects coming out that are focusing specifically on the LCTLs in online settings, but also mobile learning. So I think there's a lot of exciting new material coming out. Finally, just what is the future? Well, I think what we need to start thinking about, given that we are not going to go back to thinking that unlimited funding is going to be available, that we can do what we once thought we could do, we need to begin thinking about sharing, about curricula as extending beyond your institutional boundaries, to think about shared curricula and shared space. In terms of delictals, I think we can also begin thinking about them as extended communities of practice. So we're no longer as insular as we once were, bounded by our institutions or by our departments, but where we connect to other departments for professional development, for talking about teaching together, about the issues that we share, and strengthen our pedagogy that way. I think it's very important that this is part of the broader curriculum so that we are connecting languages, and particularly also less commonly taught languages, to curricular needs. And it's not just a standalone, standalone kind of, oh, there's a language out there, I take it for a couple of semesters, and then it disappears. It needs to be embedded in the student disciplinary interests. And I think we also need to be creative and flexible about it. Some of the older departmental models are very rigid. So I'm not saying that they should go away, but we should think beyond that. Are there other ways that we can work with the students to meet their needs and make sure that what they want to do, they can in fact do, that they're not prevented from doing so by kind of outdated structures that we still have in place. So with that, thank you very much for listening. I want to thank a number of my colleagues who contributed to the information that I gave you. So thank you.
So thank you, Nelleke. We have about 10 minutes for questions.
Yeah,
Yes,
I have a question.
Maria.
Nelleke, it is very exciting, and the projects are really exciting and interesting, and it looks simply amazing, the collaboration, and I just can't even think of how many. Oh, because it was okay. I was talking. Okay, I was hoping I'm speaking in my teaching voice. Sorry. Yeah, loud enough. Anyhow, I'm rehearsing the question. And again, first I wanted to express how impressed I am with both projects. And my question is more within the logistics, the issues of how to actually take it off the ground. In particular, it looks like both projects are kind of roots grass type of projects where students come to your center and express certain interests. They already have investment or interest in learning certain languages. And my question is it really how both projects started, that you had students and you had students with certain interest in languages and then they come to you and from there on the project develops? Or rather, the project originates as an idea of collaboration or as a way to escape or survive within the new climate of budgetary cuts, and then you search for those students and search for the opportunities. What is the way, and at what point grants come in? Do they come? Yeah, do they come at the stage when you already have something running and can present as a model, or you get money first and funds first, and then you go on to developing the program?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a difference in each program. The first one, our DILS